The sun hung high over the bustling village square, painting the air in waves of gold and dust. Women shouted over one another to sell their spices, traders argued over baskets of grain, and children darted between stalls, laughing. But in the middle of it all stood Nia, a young woman in a torn wrapper, her face streaked with ash from the hearth where she worked. Her wrists were red from carrying firewood, and her hair, once thick and braided, was tied back in rough knots. Her mistress, Lady Efua, towered behind her like a shadow. Efua's skin glistened with palm oil, and her golden bangles clinked with every movement. Her daughter, Amara, followed closely, her laughter sharp as broken glass. "Move, slave." Efua snapped as Nia stumbled with a basket of yam. The word slave cut through the air like a spear. People turned. A few laughed, others looked away pretending not to see. "I am not a slave," Nia murmured, barely audible. But Efua heard it. She grabbed Nia's chin roughly and forced her to look up. "Then why do you look like one? Why do you live like one? You eat our leftovers, sleep by the fire, and speak only when told." The crowd began to gather. Nia's throat tightened, her pulse pounding in her ears. She wanted to scream, to tell them she was not born a servant, that once her mother sang lullabies in the palace courtyard before sickness took her. But she had learned that truth meant little when wrapped in poverty. That day was no ordinary market day. The prince of the land, heir to the throne, was visiting to oversee the people's trade. His arrival came with the sound of drums and the smell of burning incense. The crowd shifted, bowing low as his retinue entered. Efua's eyes gleamed. She pushed Nia forward to kneel. "Lower your head, slave. Do not let royalty see your filthy face." The prince dismounted his horse, dressed in a white robe trimmed with gold. His eyes were calm, yet they carried a quiet fire. As he walked past, his gaze caught Nia's bowed figure. Something about the stillness of her trembling frame made him stop. "What is your name?" the prince asked softly. Efua laughed, a sound both nervous and arrogant. "Forgive her, my lord. She is only a servant. She knows not her place." The prince ignored Efua's interruption. "I asked her," he repeated. Nia's lips trembled. She looked up for the first time and their eyes met. Her face was streaked with ash, her eyes red from smoke, but beneath that, there was something fierce and unbroken. "Nia," she said finally, voice hoarse. "My name is Nia." The market fell silent. Even the traders stopped their bargaining. Efua hissed, "Speak when spoken to, fool," and raised her hand to strike her. But the prince caught Efua's wrist midair. The crowd gasped. "No one strikes another in my presence," the prince said quietly. He turned back to Nia. "A servant who holds her dignity among mockery is no slave in my eyes." Efua's face burned red, but she bowed. Amara looked away, biting her lip in envy. When the prince mounted his horse again, his gaze lingered on Nia. "The court will need new attendants," he announced, his tone deliberately measured. "Perhaps some faces here will be seen again." The drums started again as he departed, but the air did not return to normal. The crowd buzzed, half in awe, half in fear. Efua grabbed Nia's arm roughly, dragging her home. "You think you've won the prince's favor, don't you?" she spat. "You think your filthy tears will make him forget your place? Let me remind you, girl, you belong beneath my feet." As they disappeared into the narrow road leading home, the villagers whispered behind them. "Did you see how he looked at her? Maybe fate hasn't forgotten her after all." But Nia walked in silence. Somewhere deep inside, a flame that had long been buried began to breathe again. And though the word slave still echoed in her ears, she whispered to herself beneath the noise of the crowd. "One day I will show them who I truly am." The courtyard of Lady Efua's compound was alive with evening sounds, goats bleating, pestles thudding against mortars, and the soft hum of gossip drifting between the women who worked. The orange sun had begun its slow descent, laying streaks of fire across the mud walls. Yet amidst the calm, tension simmered like a pot left too long on the fire. Nia moved quietly through it all, her bare feet leaving faint prints on the red earth. She carried a clay pot of water balanced expertly on her head, though her arms ached from the weight. Every few steps she could feel Efua's eyes on her, watchful, waiting for an excuse to strike. "Be careful, slave," Amara called mockingly from her stool, where she was having her hair braided. "You wouldn't want to spill that on yourself before the prince invites you to the palace." Her friends laughed. Nia said nothing. Silence had become her armor. She had learned long ago that words were dangerous, they could twist against you faster than a snake. Still, her mind returned again and again to that moment in the market. The prince's voice, calm yet commanding. his eyes which had seen her not as dirt, but as something worth asking a name for. It had been just a few words, yet they echoed louder than all Efua's insults combined. Inside the house, Lady Efua sat cross-legged, beating a necklace of coral stones. "Amara," she said sharply, "fetch my gold head wrap. The prince's attendants ride through the lower road tonight. I want him to see our house from the path." Amara grinned. "And if he remembers the slave you humiliated in the market?" Efua's hand froze. Then she gave a low laugh, dangerous and cold. "He will not. By the time the moon rises, Nia will be scrubbing the courtyard with her tears. A prince may notice a beggar once, but no man remembers dust after it's swept away." Nia heard every word from where she knelt washing calabashes. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to keep working. Her mother had always told her, even the smallest ember can become a flame if it waits for the wind. That night, when everyone slept, Nia slipped out into the moonlight. The world was silver and still. She walked to the old well behind the compound, a place where she often went to whisper her pain into the darkness below. "Mother," she murmured, tracing the worn stones. "They call me a slave. But you said I was born with light in my hands. Was it all a dream?" Only the frogs answered her. Then from the distance came the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate. Nia froze, stepping back into the shadows. A small group of riders approached along the path, torches flickering in their hands. In front rode the same man whose voice had haunted her thoughts, the prince. He stopped near the well, speaking softly to the elder riding beside him. "This is the lower path to the merchant's quarter, isn't it? I remember this house from the market." The elder nodded. "Yes, my prince. It belongs to Lady Efua. She's wealthy, but her heart is said to be carved from stone." The prince's eyes scanned the dark compound. "And the girl?" "The one from the market." "Likely a servant," the elder said dismissively. "Forget her, my lord. Women like that are born to serve." The prince did not respond. But Nia saw the faint tightening of his jaw before they rode on. When the sound of hooves faded, Nia stood still for a long time. A single tear slid down her cheek, catching the moonlight like glass. The next morning, Efua was in a fury. A royal messenger had arrived with a sealed scroll, summoning her daughter Amara to the palace for service and consideration. The words filled Efua's heart with pride. "It's happening," Amara squealed, twirling before the mirror. "He must have noticed me at the market." Efua smiled, clutching her daughter's face. "Tonight you will shine. Remember, you are the jewel of this house. Leave no room for any shadow." But as Nia swept the courtyard, a soft wind brushed her cheek, carrying with it the scent of salt and dust. Something stirred deep within her, a knowing, unspoken but real. The prince's eyes had not followed Amara in the market. They had followed her. That evening, when the drums echoed from the hills announcing the royal procession, Efua's compound glowed with oil lamps and perfumes. But Nia's heart beat with another kind of fire, one born of pain, memory, and the faint, terrifying taste of destiny. Somewhere between the stars and the dust beneath her feet, she whispered to herself, "They will all remember my name." By dawn, the village was buzzing like a disturbed hive. The royal procession had passed through at night, and every household now gossiped about who would be called to serve at the palace. When the palace guards rode back through the main road, people gathered to see whose names were written on the golden scroll. Drummers followed behind, beating slow rhythms that made hearts tremble. Lady Efua stood in front of her gate with Amara at her side, both draped in silk and coral beads. Efua's smile was bright, confident. She believed this was her long-awaited reward. Nia, barefoot and quiet, stood in the corner of the courtyard holding a basket of laundry. She had been forbidden to come near the gate. The head guard unrolled the scroll. His voice rang out clearly. "By decree of the palace, the Prince of Ebon Kingdom summons the maiden. Nia, daughter of Abony." Silence. Then chaos. Amara's mouth fell open. What did he say?" Efua blinked as if her ears deceived her. "There must be a mistake. There is no Nia, daughter of Abony here." But the guard looked up. His gaze fell upon Nia, the girl half hidden in the shadows, clutching her basket. "You," he said firmly. "Step forward." Nia's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Her throat felt dry, yet her feet moved as if drawn by unseen strings. Efua stepped in front of her. "No. She is my servant, my slave." Surely the prince did not mean. The guard cut her off with a glare. "The prince's order bears his seal. Do you wish to defy the crown?" Efua faltered. Around her, the neighbors whispered furiously. Some looked shocked, others gleeful. The same people who had once mocked Nia now stared as if seeing her for the first time. Nia bowed her head, trembling. "My lady, I—" "Silence," Efua hissed, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. "You think you deserve this? You with your dirt and scars." The guard stepped forward and pulled Nia away. "You will come with us. The prince awaits." As they led her to the royal carriage, Nia looked back once. Efua and Amara stood frozen in the courtyard, their faces pale with disbelief and rage. The drums resumed. The villagers shouted her name, some in envy, some in awe, some in fear. Inside the carriage, Nia sat rigid, staring at her trembling hands. The air smelled of royal oils and sandalwood. She tried to make sense of it, how a prince could summon her by name when they had exchanged only one brief conversation. The head guard rode beside her. "You're lucky, girl. Many dreamed to see the palace even once. Whatever you did to catch the prince's eye, thank your stars." Nia forced a small nod, though she felt anything but lucky. Every road she had walked since her mother's death had been lined with humiliation and pain. She didn't trust miracles anymore. The journey took half a day. As they neared the capital, the golden towers of the palace rose from the horizon like the bones of a sleeping god. The walls shimmered in the afternoon sun, and beyond them, drums and flutes echoed faintly. At the palace gates, rows of guards stood at attention. Nia was led through courtyards filled with fountains, peacocks, and servants dressed in silks. Everything glowed, the marble floors, the carved pillars, even the air itself seemed to shimmer. And yet, her heart felt heavy. Finally, she was brought before the prince. He stood near a balcony looking out over the sea of roofs below. When he turned, the same calm eyes that had met hers in the market now studied her in the quiet of the palace. "So," he said, his voice softer than she remembered, "you did come." Nia fell to her knees, bowing deeply. "My lord, I came because you called. But I am unworthy." "Unworthy?" he interrupted. "The first time I saw you, I saw strength. When others laughed, you bowed but did not break. Tell me, how many times must a person endure being called a slave before she begins to believe it?" Her throat tightened. She had no answer. The prince stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You will not serve in the kitchens nor as a maid. You will serve beside me where I can see who you truly are." Nia lifted her eyes, shock and fear mingling. "Beside you?" "Yes," he said simply. "The court will protest, but I will not change my mind." Before she could speak, a court attendant entered, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, the council awaits your word on tomorrow's ceremony." The prince nodded and turned back to Nia. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow they will see you for who you are." As the attendants led her away, Nia glanced once more at him, the man who had turned her chains into questions. Yet as she entered the chamber prepared for her, one thought burned in her chest like fire. If he defies the court for me, they will not forgive him, nor me. And somewhere far away, Lady Efua whispered into the wind, "If she rises, I will be the one to pull her down." The next morning, the palace stirred like a hive of hornets. Word spread through corridors and courtyards that the prince had summoned a village girl, a slave, they said, to stand beside him in court. No one had ever heard such madness. The high ladies whispered behind painted fans. The ministers grumbled that the prince was bewitched. Servants carrying trays paused to gossip before hurrying off in fear of being seen. Nia, meanwhile, stood before a mirror for the first time in her life. The maidservants had dressed her in a gown of pale gold, the fabric softer than she had ever touched. Her reflection startled her. The same face that once bent beneath shame now glowed with a hesitant light. Yet she could not shake the tremor in her chest. When the court horns sounded, she followed the attendant down a long corridor lined with carved ivory columns. Every step echoed. Every breath felt borrowed. As she entered the grand hall, hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The council sat in semicircles of gold and crimson. The prince was already there, seated on the raised dais beneath the carved lion emblem of Ebon Kingdom. He rose when she entered. "People of my court," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "this is Nia, daughter of Ebony. From this day, she will serve as my royal aide and advisor in matters of the people." Gasps swept the hall like a sudden gust of wind. A woman in a jeweled head wrap, Lady Nafula, the prince's aunt, rose sharply. "Your Highness," she said, her tone sugar wrapped around venom, "this is highly irregular." The girl's hands are calloused, her back bent from labor. "You mean to tell us this is who you choose to stand beside the bloodline of kings?" The prince's eyes glinted. "I mean to tell you that I choose for myself." Another counselor muttered, "A peasant girl beside royalty, the gods will frown." "She's not a peasant," said Lady Nafula. She's a slave. Everyone in the lower quarter knows it. Her stepmother sold her like property. Laughter rippled cruelly across the room. The word struck Nia like blows. Slave. The same name that had been chained to her identity for years, now echoing in the halls of power. The prince raised his hand, silencing them. A person may be called a slave, he said, his voice cutting like steel, but only cowards believe the name defines the soul. The room fell quiet. For a moment even the air held its breath. Lady Nafula smirked faintly. Very well. But words cannot cleanse bloodlines. Let her speak for herself. Tell us, girl, she turned toward Nia, her tone dripping with scorn. What wisdom does a slave have for the court of kings? Nia froze. The prince started to speak, but Nia raised a trembling hand. Let me answer. She stepped forward. The hall's marble floor felt cold under her feet. I have no wisdom of scrolls or thrones, she said softly. But I have carried water that tasted of dust and tears. I have seen how hunger steals the light from a mother's eyes. And I have learned that silence is the first chain people give to the weak. That is what I know. Her words hung in the air like smoke. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then from the corner of the hall, a deep voice said, "The girl speaks truth." It was the high priest, an old man draped in indigo robes. He rose slowly, his staff tapping the floor. I have read the winds and I have seen her face in them. There is power where pain has lived. Lady Nafula's smile faltered. You cannot mean. I mean that the gods do not favor bloodlines, the priest said. They favor hearts unbroken. The murmurs returned, but this time they were uncertain. The prince stepped beside Nia, his eyes fierce. Let this be written, he said. From this day forward, no one in this palace shall call her slave again. Lady Nafula's jaw tightened. And if we refuse? He turned to her, voice dropping low. Then you defy not me but the gods who witness this day. A hush settled once more. Nia bowed slightly. Her heart trembled, torn between gratitude and dread. For every kind word the prince spoke, another storm brewed behind the court's smiles. When the audience ended, servants led her to her new quarters, a small room overlooking the gardens. She stood by the window watching the wind bend the tall palms. The palace was beautiful, yes, but she could already feel the eyes watching her from the shadows. Down the corridor, Lady Nafula spoke in hushed tones with the royal steward. That girl will not last, she said coldly. If the prince has forgotten how fragile hearts are, then let us remind him. The steward hesitated. You mean to harm her? Lady Nafula smiled thinly. No. We will let her drown in the very water he placed her in. Let the court break her before I ever lift a hand. That night, Nia lay awake on the silk bed, unable to sleep. The stars outside shimmered faintly, their light broken by the carved lattice of the window. She thought of her mother, of the years she had spent believing she was nothing more than a servant, and of the prince's words. How many times must a person endure being called a slave before she begins to believe it? And just before sleep claimed her, a shadow passed her door. A whisper followed. She will fall from grace before the next moon. Cliffhanger. Nia opened her eyes in the darkness. Someone had drawn the word slave on her mirror in blood-red dye. The morning light crept into Nia's chamber like an intruder. It touched the mirror first, and there, written in dark red streaks, the word still glared, slave. Her breath caught. For a moment she thought it might be a dream, but when she stepped closer, the air carried the faint scent of palm dye and copper. Her stomach turned. Someone had entered while she slept. The maid who came to wake her screamed when she saw it. Within moments, guards filled the corridor, whispering among themselves. Nia stood silent, heart pounding, while they searched the room. The dye dripped slowly down the mirror like blood tears. When the prince arrived, his expression was thunder. Who did this? He demanded. The guards bowed, trembling. We do not know, Your Highness. There were no signs of forced entry. The prince turned to Nia. Did you hear anything? She shook her head. Only whispers in the corridor. He clenched his jaw. Someone wishes to humiliate you, and to test me. He looked at the mirror again, then back at her. They want to remind you of what you were, not who you are. Nia lowered her eyes. Then perhaps they are right, she said softly. Perhaps I do not belong here. The prince stepped closer. Do not give them your fear. They can only use what you surrender. But though his words were firm, the court was already stirring. Before noon, gossip ran like wildfire through the palace. That the prince's slave had summoned curses, that the gods were displeased, that blood had written itself upon her mirror as a warning. By midday, Lady Nafula stood in the council hall, fanning herself lazily as if the matter amused her. "Your Highness," she said when the prince entered, "this incident has unsettled the court. Perhaps the girl should be sent back until the omens are clear." The prince's voice was ice. "You mean until she disappears?" A ripple of uneasy laughter passed among the ministers. "We only speak of the kingdom's peace," one said. "Peace built on cruelty is nothing but silence," the prince replied. "And silence is the language of cowards." Lady Nafula's eyes flashed. "Be careful, nephew. A woman with scars can still bring down a kingdom." "Then let the kingdom fall before it becomes a cage," he said, and left the hall without bowing. That night, Nia sat alone in her chamber, staring again at the mirror. The stain had been cleaned, but she could still see the ghost of the letters. She lifted her hand and traced where the word had been. "Slave," she whispered. The word no longer cut her. It only reminded her how far she had come from the ashes of her past. Then came a sound, soft, deliberate footsteps outside her door. Her pulse quickened. She blew out her lamp and moved quietly to the side. The handle turned. A shadow entered. It was not a guard. It was a woman, tall and veiled, her movements careful. The moonlight touched her hands, revealing fingers stained faintly red. "Who are you?" Nia whispered. The woman froze. Then slowly she lifted her veil. It was Amara. Nia gasped, her knees almost giving way. "You, how?" Amara's smile was sharp. "Surprised? You thought the palace would not open its gates to beauty when it knocks? I came with Lady Nafula's caravan. The court always needs new maidens, and my face opens more doors than yours ever could." Nia's chest tightened. "Why are you here?" "To remind you who you are," Amara hissed. "No gown can wash away what you were born as, a servant. You think the prince loves you? He will tire of your scars soon enough." Nia held her gaze. "Then why does your voice shake?" Amara's lips curled. "Because I cannot stand watching a mistake praised as fate. You were nothing. You still are." She stepped closer, whispering in her ear. "I wrote on your mirror last night. Every servant in this palace will soon know it." Nia did not move. "Do what you must. But remember, mirrors reflect both faces. Yours will not always be the prettier one." Amara stiffened, eyes dark with fury. "You dare." Before she could finish, the door opened sharply. The prince stood there, flanked by two guards. His gaze swept over the scene, the open door, Nia's pale face, Amara's trembling hand. "Take her," he said coldly. Amara froze. "You can't." "I can," the prince said. "Lies and envy are poison here. I will not let them spread." As the guard seized her, Amara spat. "You'll regret this. She'll destroy you all." The prince did not answer. He only turned to Nia, his expression torn between anger and concern. "You see now what they are capable of?" Nia nodded slowly, though her heart ached. "Yes. But I also see what I must become to survive it." He looked at her as though seeing something change behind her eyes, something steady, unbreakable. Cliffhanger. That night, when the palace torches dimmed, Nia looked once more into her mirror, and saw a faint golden glow tracing across her scars, shaping a pattern that gleamed like a hidden crown. The day of the royal feast arrived, and the palace bloomed with laughter, gold, and sweet music that seemed to mock the ache in Ebony's heart. Every corridor shimmered with fine fabrics and oils. Perfumes drifted through the air like invisible hands stroking vanity. She had been assigned to serve food, not as a guest, not even as a worker of worth, but as the slave girl who must kneel when offering plates. Her stepsister Kunto made sure to remind her, "Do not look up, dog. You serve kings, not yourself." The words burned, but Ebony obeyed. She carried trays of roasted yam, palm stew, and golden rice, her head bowed so low that her tears nearly mixed with the food. The nobles laughed at the strange scars on her face, whispering that they looked like the cracked surface of dried earth. "Hide her next time," one woman sneered to Kunto. "Her ugliness kills the appetite." But the prince, the one who had once seen her across the courtyard and asked who she was, sat silently. His gaze followed her every movement, and though his face remained calm, his fists tightened each time someone mocked her. As the night deepened, Kunto, drunk on attention, decided to make her cruelty into a show. "My lord," she said to the prince, "shall I tell you something amusing? This girl once thought herself beautiful, until my hot water taught her her place." The table erupted in laughter. Ebony froze mid-step, the pot of wine trembling in her hand. Her eyes darted to the prince, who did not laugh. Instead, he rose slowly, his chair scraping the floor like thunder. "Bring her here," he said. The hall fell silent. Kunto's smile faltered. My lord. Bring her, the prince repeated. Ebony was pushed forward, her knees scraping the marble floor. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, disgusted, curious, hateful. Her heart thumped in her throat like a drum of fear. The prince stepped closer, his voice calm but heavy with something ancient. Who gave you the right to call her slave? Kunto stammered. She is nothing, a servant. Before she could finish, the prince did something that made the hall gasp. He took off his crown and placed it gently at Ebony's feet. The gold glimmered against the scars on her skin. She may bear marks, he said, but they are the shape of strength, and no crown is purer than the fire that forged her. For a moment no one breathed. Kunto fell to her knees, trembling. The queen herself rose, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ebony stared at the crown, her tears dropping on the polished metal, each drop hissing as if it met flame. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but filled with something unstoppable. I never wanted your crown, my prince. Only the right to exist without chains. The prince smiled faintly. Then take that right, and know it will never be taken again. From that night on, whispers spread through the kingdom, that a scarred girl made the prince kneel. That beauty was not in smoothness, but in the strength to endure what others could not. And those who had laughed at her before began to bow their heads when she passed, not from pity, but from something that felt like fear. Because in her scars, they saw their own cruelty reflected. And in her silence, they heard the echo of a throne trembling. The feast ended in a strange silence. The guests left one by one, their jeweled sandals whispering against the marble floors, their tongues still heavy with disbelief. None could erase the image of the prince placing his crown before a scarred servant. None dared to speak too loudly about it, for the act itself carried a warning that every soul in that hall understood. The crown had chosen truth over beauty, and it would not forget. But when the last torch burned low and the laughter was gone, Kunto's mother, Lady Airy, stormed into the prince's private chambers. My lord, she hissed, her eyes blazing. Do you understand what you have done? That girl is filth. She belongs to no name, no title, no house. You have shamed the kingdom by kneeling to her. The prince looked at her quietly, his jaw sharp as stone. I have knelt to no one, he said. I only raised what your cruelty buried. Lady Airy's lips curled. You speak boldly for one who sits under the king's mercy. My husband will not allow this madness. Then let him try, the prince said softly, turning away. And let him hear what the gods whispered when the fire met her skin. The next morning rumors spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered that Lady Airy had gone to the king himself, demanding punishment for Ebony, to have her cast out, whipped, or worse. But the king, old and wearied by politics, only said, if my son placed his crown before her, then perhaps it is because the gods demanded it. Those words struck fear into the hearts of many. Yet Kunto refused to bow to fate. Enraged and humiliated, she began to plot. That night, as the moon rose like a pale wound, she crept into Ebony's small quarters at the edge of the servants' wing. The scarred girl sat by a dying lamp, her fingers tracing the rim of a wooden bowl filled with water, her reflection warped and broken. You think you've won, Kunto whispered, stepping from the shadows. But he only pities you. When the pity fades, you'll go back to scrubbing floors. You'll see. Ebony looked up slowly, her eyes calm and unreadable. If pity made him kneel, then your cruelty made me rise. Kunto lunged forward, grabbing her by the hair. Say that again. But before she could strike, the lamp flickered, and the water in the bowl began to swirl violently. Ebony's eyes glowed faintly, like embers under ash. The crown in the prince's chamber, the same one laid at her feet, began to hum softly, and from its golden edges, thin streams of light escaped, moving through the corridors like living fire. Kunto screamed and stumbled backward as the light flooded into the room, wrapping around Ebony like threads of gold. Her scars shimmered. The marks that once looked like burns now formed strange patterns, a crown of flame etched by pain itself. Do you see it now? Ebony whispered. The gods do not write beauty on the skin, they carve truth into flesh. Kunto fell to her knees, trembling. What are you? I am what your cruelty created, Ebony said, her voice both human and something greater. And now the crown knows the truth. The next day, when the prince found Ebony in the courtyard, she was standing barefoot in the sun, her eyes clearer than morning light. The golden light that had filled the palace the night before had vanished, but its presence lingered. The prince looked at her scars, now unmistakably forming the faint outline of a crown across her forehead. The gods have spoken, he said quietly. No, Abony corrected him gently. The fire has spoken. The gods only watched. From then on, the crown that once symbolized lineage began to symbolize justice. Every noble who had mocked her found their own lies exposed, one by one: theft, greed, betrayal. When any of them touched the crown, it burned their skin faintly, leaving behind small golden scars like reminders of the truth they feared. And those who were pure of heart felt only warmth. Abony became a name whispered in reverence, not because she ruled but because she revealed. People began to say that when the kingdom slept, her shadow walked the halls, marking truth where deceit once bloomed. And though she still bowed before the prince, he never allowed her to kneel for long. "You were forged in pain," he told her one night under a silver moon. "But the crown that burned through lies belongs to you, not me." She smiled faintly, the light dancing over her scars. "Then let the crown stay between us, my prince, not on our heads, but as a flame that remembers." The days that followed were uneasy. The kingdom had grown restless, whispering about the girl with fire-shaped scars and the prince who defied tradition. Some called it a miracle. Others called it blasphemy. But everyone agreed on one thing: the crown no longer belonged only to kings. The elders demanded a trial. "If the gods have truly marked her," said the chief elder, "then let the crown speak once more, in the sight of all." The prince agreed, though his heart burned with anger. "Let them see what truth really looks like," he said. On the morning of the trial, the palace courtyard filled with nobles, guards, and commoners. Drums pounded low and the air shimmered with heat. At the center stood Abony, dressed in plain white cloth, her hair bound, her eyes calm. Her scars glimmered faintly like gold dust under the sun. The chief elder lifted the royal crown from a cushion, its gold now darker, heavier, as though it remembered everything it had seen. "By the laws of our ancestors," he declared, "this crown accepts only truth. Let her touch it and we will know." Abony stepped forward. Murmurs rose like wind through dry grass. Kunto stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale and tight with dread. The prince watched silently, hands clenched at his sides. Abony knelt, her voice steady. "You called me slave," she said. "You stripped me of name and worth. But the fire carved both into me again. If this crown knows truth, then let it judge not by birth, but by spirit." Her fingers brushed the metal. At first nothing happened. The crowd leaned in. Then the gold began to glow, not burning, not scorching, but pulsing like a heartbeat. The light spread up her arms, illuminating her scars until they flared bright as dawn. Gasps filled the air. The chief elder stumbled backward. "The crown, it accepts her." But before the prince could speak, a cry rose from the side. Kunto rushed forward, shouting, "Lies? It's witchcraft. The crown can't choose a servant." She snatched the crown and slammed it against her chest. The crowd froze. For a moment, nothing, then a hiss of pain. Smoke rose from her skin. She screamed and threw the crown to the ground, where it landed with a sharp ring, red-hot and trembling. The light shot from it, striking the sky, a column of gold that made the palace tremble. The drums stopped. The prince stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Enough," he said. "The crown has spoken. It burns falsehood and bows to truth. This trial is over." He turned to Abony and lifted her gently to her feet. Her eyes glistened with tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I never wanted power," she whispered. He nodded. "And that is why you deserve it." The chief elder bent his head. "From this day," he proclaimed, voice trembling, "let the mark of the crown be known, not on gold but in flesh. The gods have chosen their witness." That night the village fires burned low. People gathered in silence, speaking her name in awe. Mothers told their children, "Be kind, for the gods carve their crowns where the world cannot see." Kunto fled before dawn, her chest still marked with the faint scar of her own deceit, a blistered circle forever raw. As for Abony, she stood once more in the courtyard where her pain had begun. The air smelled of smoke and new beginnings. The prince stood beside her, silent but proud. "You were called slave," he said softly, "but today they called you truth." She looked up at the horizon. "No," she replied, her voice carrying on the wind. "They only spoke what the scars already knew." And somewhere deep in the palace the crown sat quietly, no longer shining, no longer cold, but alive, waiting, listening. Cliffhanger. That night, when the moonlight touched its edge, the crown bled a single drop of gold onto the stone floor, as if remembering the price of truth. The palace did not sleep that night. The elders murmured among themselves, afraid to name what they had seen. Guards whispered that the crown had moved in the dark, that they'd heard it hum like a living thing. At dawn, a servant entered the throne room and found the crown not on its cushion but on the floor, gleaming faintly in a pool of gold dust. No one had touched it. No one dared. The prince summoned the elders. "It moves," he said quietly. "It remembers." But the chief elder only bowed his head. "It remembers injustice. Remembers blood. Crowns always do." Outside, the villagers gathered again, this time not out of fear but hope. They wanted to see the scarred girl who had bent gold and truth with her touch. They wanted to believe that the gods had returned their gaze to mortals. Ebony, meanwhile, felt the pull of the crown even from her chamber. It was as if a thread connected them, a whisper running through her veins. That night, she dreamed of water, of light, of thousands of faces in the depths calling her name. When she awoke, the air around her shimmered faintly as if the room itself bowed. The prince entered quietly. "You feel it too," he said. She nodded. "It's restless. It doesn't want to sit on a head that lies. It wants to serve truth." He studied her face. "Then perhaps it no longer belongs to a king." Before she could answer, a messenger burst in, gasping. "My prince, the elders. They've taken the crown to the temple. They say the gods must reclaim it before it curses us all." The prince's jaw tightened. "They mean to erase what they fear." He and Ebony ran through the corridors, torches flickering. Outside, the temple loomed against the sky, the elders already gathered in a circle. The crown rested on the altar, gold light rising from it like smoke. The chief elder raised a staff. "By the will of the old ways," he declared, "we return this crown to the earth from which it came. Let no servant's hand defile it again." Before he could strike, the light from the crown flared, blinding, roaring like thunder. The ground trembled. The staff split in two. A voice echoed, deep and metallic, filling the air. "You call me holy, yet you chain truth in rags. You crowned cruelty and called it law." The elders fell to their knees. The prince shielded Ebony as wind whipped through the courtyard. Then the crown lifted from the altar and hovered before Ebony, glowing brighter than before. She stepped forward, heart hammering. "What do you want of me?" "To remember," the voice said. "To speak for those who cannot." The light dimmed and the crown settled back on the altar, quiet now. The elders could not meet her eyes. The prince turned to her, his voice trembling. "You heard it? It chose you again." Ebony looked at the crown, then at the frightened elders. "No," she said softly. "It chose justice. I'm only its echo." The wind died. The torches steadied. But every person present knew the kingdom had shifted, the kind of shift that cannot be undone by prayer or decree. That night, the prince ordered the crown sealed away, hidden from men's greed. Yet Ebony knew it was not the end. In her dreams, the crown still whispered, a song of fire and freedom. And sometimes when she touched her face, her scars pulsed with warmth, as though the crown's heart beat beneath her skin. Cliffhanger. In the silence before dawn, a guard outside the sealed chamber heard a faint sound, a woman's voice humming from inside, the same lullaby Ebony once sang as a servant. Years passed, but the story of the scarred servant who touched the crown never faded. Children whispered her name before sleep. Old women traced the shape of her scars in ash and said they resembled the sun's own rays. And in the palace, though the crown remained sealed behind stone doors, some nights a faint humming could still be heard, a woman's song, low and steady, like the heartbeat of the kingdom itself. Ebony had left the palace long ago. She wandered from village to village, teaching those who had been forgotten, slaves, widows, outcasts, how to read, how to speak, how to hold their heads high. To the poor she was not a queen but a sister. To the broken, not a miracle but a mirror. Yet wherever she walked, water shimmered beneath her feet. Crops grew where she rested. And in every house she entered, salt never ran out. The people said, "The gods walk with her." But Ebony only smiled and answered, "The gods walk with those who dare to remember." One season, a drought fell across the land. The rivers dried, the soil cracked, and the palace itself began to crumble. Desperate, the prince, now a weary king, sent for her. When she arrived, the people bowed not because of her scars, but because of the calm in her eyes. He met her at the steps where he once first saw her, whipped and humiliated. "I am no longer fit to rule," he said. "The crown rejects me now. It burns when I approach." Ebony looked toward the sealed chamber. The air there seemed alive, waiting. "The crown does not reject you," she said softly. "It only waits for truth to return." She walked forward. The guard stepped aside. With one touch of her scarred hand, the stone doors opened as though they had been holding their breath for years. Inside, the crown lay still. But as she neared, it began to glow faintly. She knelt beside it, whispering not to the crown, but to the memory it carried, of suffering, of forgiveness, of all who had been silenced. The prince fell to his knees. "What do we do now?" She turned to him, her voice steady. "You listen. And you rule not from the throne but from the ground, where truth was born." Then she placed her hand upon the crown, and for the last time, it flared with light. But this time it did not choose a ruler. It dissolved into golden dust, rising through the roof like dawn, scattering over the kingdom. Every grain of that gold landed somewhere different, on farmers, on mothers, on children, until every heart felt a small spark of warmth. From that day forward there was no single king, no single queen. Only a people who carried their own crowns in silence. And when the wind passed through the fields at dusk, it carried a faint song, the same lullaby Ebony had sung as a slave, the one that once called the sea, the fire, and now the hearts of men.